Welcome. Settle yourself into a comfortable position and allow the noise of your day to drift away. Here, in this quiet space, we will take a slow journey back through time, not to kings and queens or to battles and monuments, but to the forgotten corners of history where everyday life unfolded. Tonight, our path leads us into the heart of the 19th century, to the crowded streets of Victorian London. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the city into a bustling machine of trade and manufacture, but alongside its grand buildings and wealth, there stretched endless neighborhoods of shadow and struggle. This was the world of the Victorian slum. Dark, damp, and crowded, these districts were home to the poor, families squeezed into single rooms, streets thick with smoke and soot, and lives lived under the constant press of survival. It is not a romantic world, nor an easy one, but by moving gently through its narrow lanes, we can begin to understand the rhythm of life for the millions who called it home. We will explore the details of daily life there. We will listen to the footsteps of workers trudging to factories. We will follow the stories of writers and reformers who tried to shed light on suffering. We will uncover the mysteries of disease and the changes that reshaped entire neighborhoods. And finally, we will contrast this with the glittering lives of the wealthy, who dined and danced only a few streets away. So, allow the past to unfold slowly before you. Let the sights, sounds, and textures of the Victorian city carry your mind toward rest. Daily life in a Victorian slum. Imagine yourself waking in a narrow room deep in the East End of London around the year 1850. The room is small, perhaps only 10 feet across, and yet it holds not only you, but your family as well. The ceiling is low, the plaster cracked, and the faint smell of damp clings to every surface. Your bedding is little more than a thin blanket laid over straw or rags, flattened with use, carrying the sour scent of long nights and little airing. Morning light filters dimly through a single, grimy window. The glass is streaked with soot from the nearby chimneys, and the narrow lane outside blocks much of the sun. The walls weep with moisture, leaving streaks of black mildew in corners. The air is heavy, thick with the lingering smoke of yesterday's fires and the unwashed closeness of too many people in too small a space. You stir, and the sounds of the slum rise with you. Outside, carts rumble along cobbled streets, iron-rimmed wheels grinding against stone. The cries of street sellers carry through the alleyways, voices calling out the price of bread, of fish, of scraps of coal. Children's laughter echoes briefly, soon followed by coughing, sharp and insistent, cutting through the morning air. Water is the first task, as it is in so many ages. There is no tap in your room, no well in the courtyard. Instead, you join your neighbors in the queue for a communal pump, the handle slick with constant use, the water often cloudy and tinged with an earthy taste. Carrying it back is heavy work, and the street is slippery with refuse and mud. Open drains run down the center of narrow lanes, carrying away not only rainwater, but also waste from houses and factories. The smell is sharp, sour, and ever-present, a mixture of smoke, damp, and rot. Breakfast is meager, perhaps a crust of stale bread softened in weak tea, or porridge made thin with water. Meat is a luxury, seldom tasted, and vegetables are often limp and tired by the time they reach the slum market. For many families, hunger is a constant companion, and meals are more about survival than satisfaction. When work begins, the slum empties into the city. Men and women file out toward the factories, their clothes patched and soot-stained, their boots worn thin. Some head to the docks, where heavy loads are carried by aching backs. Others enter the endless rows of textile mills or match factories, their long hours marked by the hiss of steam and the clatter of machines. Children, too, join the day's labor, some only 6 or 7 years old, their small hands better suited for crawling into narrow spaces or handling delicate machinery. Back at the slum, the rhythm continues. Mothers scrub laundry in cold water, their hands raw and reddened. Neighbors exchange news while standing at doorways, their voices weary, yet threaded with resilience. The alleys are alive with movement, dogs searching for scraps, children darting between shadows, peddlers pushing carts heavy with second-hand goods. As evening falls, the air thickens again with smoke from countless small fires. Rooms glow dimly with candlelight, the flames flickering against damp walls. Families gather around whatever food can be shared, bowls passed hand to hand. The sound of coughing once again fills the air, joined by the muffled murmur of conversation and the occasional strain of a fiddle or voice raised in song, offering a moment of comfort against the surrounding gloom. And when night deepens, you return once more to your small, crowded room. The straw bedding rustles, the damp seeps in, and the noises of the city, carts, footsteps, the distant call of watchmen, drift through the darkness. Sleep comes slowly, uneasy, yet it is the only escape from the weariness of the day. The rhythm of life in a Victorian slum is steady and unyielding. It is marked by hunger, by labor, by the weight of survival, but also by resilience, by community, and by the quiet strength of those who endured it. Charles Dickens and the Real Children of the Slums. From the crowded streets of the slum, we move gently into the story of one man who saw it, lived it, and then gave voice to it. Charles Dickens, today remembered as one of the greatest novelists in the English language, began his life not among the comfortable, but in close contact with hardship. Born in 1812, Dickens was the son of a clerk in the Navy Pay Office. For a brief time, the family lived in modest comfort, but debts soon pulled them downward. When Charles was just 12 years old, his father was sent to debtor's prison, and the boy was forced to leave school. He worked instead in a blacking factory, pasting labels on bottles of shoe polish for 10 hours a day. The work was repetitive, grim, and humiliating, and the shame of it stayed with him for the rest of his life. It is in these early years that Dickens learned, with sharp clarity, what it meant to be a child without protection. As Dickens grew older and became a journalist, he walked the streets of London with a keen and watchful eye. The alleys and tenements of the East End, the smoky factories, the ragged children selling matches or sweeping crossings. All of these became the raw material for his fiction. His stories were not merely inventions, but reflections of what he observed and remembered. In 1837, Dickens published Oliver Twist, a novel that startled polite society with its portrait of the city's underclass. The character of Oliver, a pale, hungry orphan asking for more food in the workhouse, was not a fantasy, but a composite of countless real children Dickens had seen. These children lived in institutions where meals were small and punishments were harsh, their voices seldom heard beyond the narrow walls of their dormitories. In the streets, others scraped together a living in ways that blurred the line between survival and crime. Some picked pockets, slipping small hands into coats in crowded markets. Some sold flowers or matches late into the night, their thin clothes no match for the damp London fog. And many, far too many, died young from disease, accidents, or neglect. Dickens did not shy away from these truths, but he did not describe them with gore or cruelty either. Instead, he painted them in tones of sorrow and sympathy, inviting readers to see children not as nuisances or burdens, but as human beings with dignity and need. Through his stories, he gave the slum a voice that reached drawing rooms, parlors, and eventually Parliament itself. And yet, it is important to remember that Dickens' portrayals, though compassionate, were also shaped by the expectations of his readers. He softened some realities, choosing moments of sentiment and redemption where, in truth, despair often had no such relief. Still, his works made an impact. They stirred public debate about child labor, workhouses, and the responsibility of society toward its poorest members. Imagine Dickens himself, walking through the streets as evening fell, his tall figure wrapped in a long coat, notebook tucked beneath his arm. The flicker of gas lamps revealed scenes he would later transmute into fiction. A boy huddled in a doorway, a woman carrying a child too tired to lift its head, the sound of coughing drifting from open windows. He was both observer and participant, unable to forget his own childhood hardship, unable to turn away from what he saw in others. In his pages, the slum became visible, not romantic, not heroic, but painfully real. And for his readers, many of whom had never set foot in the East End, it was perhaps the first time they truly imagined what it would be like to live there. Thus, through Dickens, the voices of the slum children echoed far beyond their narrow lanes. And though he could not rescue them all, his stories remain as testimony, as faint echoes of their cries woven into the fabric of literature. The great stink of the Thames, a slow descent toward the river. Imagine yourself in London in the summer of 1858. The air is heavy, the sun lingers longer in the sky, and the heat presses down on the city with an unrelenting weight. The narrow streets seem even closer than usual, their bricks absorbing the warmth, their alleyways thick with dust and noise. But as you walk slowly toward the heart of the city, another sensation begins to intrude. At first it is faint, an acrid note drifting through the air. then stronger, more insistent, until it can no longer be ignored. It is the smell of the Thames. For centuries, London had turned to its river as both a source of life and a vessel for refuse. The Thames was a provider. It carried ships to the sea. It yielded fish. It reflected the glimmer of sun and moonlight upon the city's waters. But it was also the city's drain. Household waste, slaughterhouse remains, chemical runoff from factories, and, most significantly, human sewage. All of it flowed into the river day after day, year after year. In cooler seasons, or when the rains were steady, the river's currents carried much of it away. But in that sweltering summer of 1858, the tide seemed to turn. The heat baked the banks until mud cracked and oozed. The water, sluggish and low, churned slowly with its burden of filth, and the air above it became nearly unbearable. The newspapers gave it a name that has remained ever since: the Great Stink. The river as a mirror of the city. To understand how this crisis came about, one must first imagine the daily rhythm of waste in the Victorian slum. Every chamber pot emptied into drains, every bucket poured into gutters, every slaughterhouse spilling blood into the nearest ditch. All of it, inevitably, found its way into the Thames. The river was not only a disposal ground, but paradoxically, still a source of drinking water. Many households drew their supply from pumps connected to the river or to shallow wells nearby, where seepage carried contamination directly into what was considered fresh. It was a cycle both invisible and devastating. Cholera outbreaks in 1832, 1849, and 1854 had already shown the consequences, claiming tens of thousands of lives. Yet the link between contaminated water and disease was not widely accepted until later. For many, the river was simply part of the city's natural order, its foulness an unfortunate but inevitable fact of life. Now, with the summer sun magnifying every odor, the Thames became a mirror of London's neglect. The stench crept into Parliament itself, where the great windows facing the river had to be draped with curtains soaked in chloride of lime. Politicians covered their noses with handkerchiefs. Debates faltered, business slowed. The great machinery of empire, which ruled lands across the globe, found itself undone by its own river at home, walking along the embankment. Picture yourself now standing on a wooden footbridge spanning the Thames. The boards creak underfoot. Below, the water rolls sluggishly, thick with refuse. The surface is mottled with floating debris, straw, scraps of wood, the occasional carcass of an animal washed down from upriver. Bubbles rise slowly, burst, and release waves of odor that drift upward in the still heat. The color of the water is not blue, nor even brown, but a shifting palette of gray and black, with oily sheens that catch the light in muted rainbows. It is a river transformed into a cesspool, and yet, alongside its banks, life goes on. Children still play near the water's edge, their laughter carried faintly on the breeze. Women lean over from steps, washing clothes or filling buckets, their faces turned aside from the smell. Barges pass slowly, their crews grimacing but persisting, for trade does not pause. And in the narrow streets leading down to the river, shopkeepers and innkeepers do their best to carry on, though their rooms are thick with the same oppressive air, reactions of the city. The Great Stink did more than wrinkle noses, it forced recognition. For decades, reformers and scientists had spoken of the dangers of polluted water, but their voices had often been ignored. Now, with the stench unavoidable, even the most skeptical were compelled to act. Parliament debated solutions. One suggestion was to relocate government entirely away from the Thames. Another was to cover the river with lime or carbolic acid, in the hope of masking the odor. But beneath the superficial fixes lay the undeniable truth. London needed a modern sewer system. The responsibility fell to a civil engineer named Joseph Bazalgette. A quiet, meticulous man, Bazalgette had already spent years working on smaller sewer projects. Now he was given authority to reshape the very arteries of the city. Bazalgette's vision. Bazalgette's plan was bold: to construct miles of underground sewers that would intercept waste before it reached the Thames. These sewers would carry it eastward, far beyond the heart of London, where it could be released into the river closer to the sea. The project required not only engineering skill, but immense political will, financial resources, and human labor. Brick by brick, tunnel by tunnel, the system began to take form. Over the course of years, more than 80 miles of major intercepting sewers and 1,000 miles of smaller street sewers were constructed. The work was slow, backbreaking, and dangerous, yet it marked one of the greatest engineering achievements of the Victorian age. The embankments along the river, the very promenades that Londoners walk upon today, were part of this plan. Behind their elegant stone facades lie vast tunnels, hidden but vital, channeling the waste of millions away from the city center. The mystery of memory. But let us linger, not only on the engineering, but on the experience of those who lived through the Great Stink. For them, it was not simply a matter of policy or infrastructure. It was a sensory reality, pressing into every corner of their lives. Imagine yourself as a clerk working near Westminster. The windows of your office open reluctantly to the summer air. The smell seeps in regardless, clinging to paper, ink, and cloth. You press a handkerchief to your face, dampened with vinegar, and continue your work, though each breath is a struggle. Or imagine a family in the East End, already accustomed to crowded alleys and open drains. For them, the Great Stink is not a sudden crisis, but an intensification of what they endure daily. The smell of waste has always been part of their lives, woven into the very fabric of survival. The difference now is that the powerful have begun to notice. This is the subtle mystery of the Great Stink, not why it occurred, for that is clear, but why it was only in this moment that true change was made possible. The river had long been foul, disease long present, reform long argued. But only when the stench reached the halls of Parliament did action finally come. Archaeology of the Thames. Today, archaeologists and historians still study the river's banks. Excavations reveal layers of history preserved in the mud, clay pipes, fragments of pottery, worn shoes, and coins lost in the current. These remnants tell stories not only of grandeur, but of ordinary life pressed close to the water. During low tide, one might even glimpse timbers of old docks, blackened with age, or the outlines of long-vanished stairs descending to the waterline. Each piece is a reminder that the Thames was not merely a backdrop to the Great Stink, but a living part of the city's daily rhythm, both loved and loathed, both giver and taker of life. Transition toward change. By the time Bazalgette's system was completed, London had begun to transform. The outbreaks of cholera, once so frequent and devastating, gradually subsided. The smell of the river, while never entirely pleasant, lessened, and with it came a new sense of civic pride. The Great Stink faded into memory, becoming one of those historical moments that is remembered less for the suffering it caused than for the change it provoked. It was a crisis that revealed the hidden connections between health, infrastructure, and the lives of millions. And so, when we think of the Victorian slum, we must remember not only the crowded rooms and hungry children, but also the river that carried their refuse, and the moment when its stench demanded transformation. A gentle closing to the segment. Now, as you let your thoughts drift, imagine the Thames once more. Not as it was in that terrible summer, but in quieter form. The river moves slowly, its surface rippling with evening light. The sounds of the city soften into distance, replaced by the gentle lap of water against stone. The smell has faded, the crisis passed, but the memory remains, a reminder of how deeply environment shapes existence. The Great Stink is gone, but the story it tells lingers. It is the story of a city pushed to its limits, of a river burdened beyond endurance, and of the slow, eventual recognition that change was not only possible, but necessary. The contrasting daily life of the Victorian elite, from the shadowed alleys of the East End and the foul breath of the Thames, let us step gently into another world, a world that existed at the very same time, often only a few streets away, yet separated by an almost unbridgeable gulf. This is the world of the Victorian elite. Merchants, landowners, bankers, industrial magnates, and aristocrats who dined in candlelit halls, surrounded by luxury that seemed beyond imagining to those in the slums. To them, London was not a place of damp cellars and coughing children, but of music, gaslight, glittering fabrics, and heavy velvet curtains shutting out the noise and odor of the city beyond, the noble townhouse. Imagine yourself stepping into a wealthy Victorian townhouse. A servant takes your coat at the door, his livery neat, his expression quiet and practiced. The entryway is wide, the floor tiled with intricate patterns, polished until it gleams. The smell here is not of sewage or soot, but of beeswax polish, of fresh flowers arranged in vases, of roasted meats drifting from a distant kitchen. The walls are hung with oil paintings, portraits of ancestors, landscapes from travels abroad, and prints of classical ruins. Tall windows, fitted with glass rather than grime-streaked shutters, allow filtered daylight to fall across carpets imported from the Orient, their colors deep crimson and gold. Chandeliers of crystal or brass hang above, waiting for evening when gas lamps will make them shimmer. Each room is spacious, filled with carved furniture, cushioned chairs, and draperies that catch the light. In the drawing room, a piano waits for nimble fingers. Books bound in leather-lined shelves, their titles gleaming in gilt, ready to be opened by those with leisure to read. This house is not crowded. Each family member has a private chamber, a bed of thick mattress and linen sheets, warmed in winter by fires tended constantly by servants. The contrast to the slum is sharp. Here, air circulates freely, ceilings rise high, and silence is broken not by coughing and street cries, but by the controlled murmur of polite conversation. The dinner party. It is evening now. The gas lamps are lit along the main streets, glowing pale yellow against the night. Carriages rattle to a halt before the townhouse. Guests descend, cloaks gathered against the London fog, jewels catching the faint light. Inside, candles blaze in tall holders, and the great table is set. The dining room is long and grand, its table polished to a dark sheen. Each place is laid with fine china, silver cutlery, and glasses for wine and water. Decanters gleam, their deep liquid glowing like rubies. Napkins are folded in elaborate shapes, small details that remind everyone present of refinement and care. The first course arrives. Soup, perhaps turtle or mock turtle, thick and steaming, served in delicate bowls. Servants move silently, filling glasses, clearing dishes. Conversation rises and falls in practiced rhythms as guests exchange opinions on politics, literature, or the latest news from abroad. Next comes fish, fresh from the coast, cooked with herbs and served with sauces of butter and wine. After that, roasts are brought forth, beef, lamb, perhaps even venison, carried in on great platters. The smell is rich and savory, filling the room with warmth. Vegetables accompany them, not limp and tired, but fresh and carefully prepared. Peas, carrots, potatoes whipped with cream. Wines flow freely, French clarets, ports from Portugal, sherry from Spain. The glasses catch the candlelight as they are raised and lowered in gentle toasts. The air grows warmer, softer, filled with laughter and the subtle clink of cutlery. For dessert, there may be fruit preserved in syrup, puddings heavy with raisins and spices, or custard set in elegant molds. Coffee and tea follow, the former dark and aromatic, the latter poured from shining silver pots into cups of fine porcelain. Throughout, servants remain attentive, moving like shadows to ensure every plate is full, every glass refreshed. The world of polite conversation. Around the table, conversation flows with ease. Guests speak of parliament debates, of reforms and policies that shape the nation. They speak of art exhibitions, of theater performances, of the latest serial installments by writers like Dickens, though often discussed as curiosities rather than truths of life. Some speak of travel, journeys to the continent, to Italy, to the Alps, where mountain air seems a world away from the London fog. Laughter punctuates the evening, though it is controlled, never raucous. Faces glow in candlelight, cheeks flushed with warmth and wine. There is music waiting in the next room. Perhaps a pianist will play, or a young woman will sing a ballad, her voice rising gently through the house. This, too, is Victorian life, polished, ordered, comfortable, and insulated. It exists not far from the slums, but worlds apart in experience. Daily routines of the elite. Beyond the dinner parties, daily routines of the wealthy carried their own rhythm. A gentleman's morning might begin with a leisurely breakfast: eggs, toast, tea, perhaps kippers or ham. He would read the newspaper, discuss investments, or write letters in a quiet study. Later, he might visit his club, where he would exchange conversation with peers, smoke cigars, or read by a fire in silence. A lady of the house had her own responsibilities. Those servants performed much of the labor. She was expected to manage the household, directing the cook, the maids, and the butler. She might spend part of the day sewing, writing letters, or paying social calls. Her afternoons could include strolls in the park, visits to galleries, or afternoons of tea with friends. Clothing was chosen carefully: layers of silk, velvet, and lace, maintained by skilled dressmakers. Children in such households lived lives of learning and privilege. Tutors came to instruct them in Latin, mathematics, music, and drawing. Their games were played in spacious nurseries or in private gardens, far from the smoky alleys of the slum. Illness touched them less often, and when it did, physicians and medicines were close at hand. Contrasts and intersections. And yet, despite this comfort, the wealthy could not entirely escape the realities of the city around them. Their carriages rolled past slum streets. Their kitchens required servants who often came from poor families, and their homes were lit and heated by coal carried through the same docks and yards where the poor labored. There were moments when the two worlds brushed against each other. A servant might cough from the same air that sickened slum dwellers. A wealthy patron might pass a barefoot child on the way to the theater. Yet these encounters were fleeting, quickly smoothed away by the layers of fabric and ceremony that separated them. The contrast is striking. In one world, families crowded into single rooms, eating stale bread and weak tea. In the other, families reclined at long tables, feasting on roasts and puddings. Both worlds existed within the same city, often within sight of one another, yet divided by money, by power, and by social distance. A gentle reflection. Now imagine yourself drifting slowly through both worlds. You walk first through the narrow slum alley, where walls press in and smells cling to your clothes. Then you step, with only a few paces, into the broad hall of the townhouse, where chandeliers glow and polished wood reflects firelight. It is as though two Londons coexisted, overlapping but separate. The slum, with its constant struggle. The drawing room, with its constant ease. And yet both are part of the same Victorian city, tied together in ways both visible and hidden, by trade, by labor, by the unseen network of sewers beneath, by the great river carrying away their waste. The slum and the elite were different faces of the same London. One world bore the weight of survival. The other enjoyed the fruits of comfort. But together, They form the heartbeat of a city that was at once magnificent and miserable, rich and poor, proud and ashamed. Closing the segment. And so, as night deepens, picture both Londons at rest. In the East End, families settle into straw bedding, the damp creeping through cracks, the air filled with the coughs of tired children. In the West End, nobles draw curtains against the night, reclining beneath heavy quilts, the quiet hum of servants moving softly through the hall. The city breathes in unison, yet in two distinct rhythms, one fast and hard, born of labor and want, the other slow and cushioned, born of leisure and wealth. This contrast is not only the story of Victorian London, but of history itself, the constant dance between poverty and privilege, survival and comfort. And so, our journey through Victorian London comes to its quiet end. We began in the narrow lanes of the slum, where mornings broke in damp rooms and children stirred on straw bedding, their days marked by hunger, labor, and endurance. We walked with Charles Dickens, who carried those memories into his novels, giving voice to the children of the poor and shaping how the wider world would see them. We drifted along the Thames during the Great Stink, where the river itself rose in protest against centuries of neglect, forcing change upon a city that could no longer ignore its own waste. And we ended among the wealthy, in grand townhouses where candles glowed over heavy curtains and tables groaned under platters of food, lives lived in comfort and ease, far removed from the shadowed alleys only a few streets away. Two Londons, one of hardship and constant struggle, the other of leisure and refinement, each defined by the same time and place, yet separated by walls of wealth, habit, and circumstance. And yet, together, they formed the living heartbeat of a city that was both magnificent and miserable, both glittering and grim. As you reflect now, let the sounds of that city grow softer in your imagination. The cries of street sellers fade into the distance. The coughs and clatter of the slum fall away. Even the laughter of dinner parties and the chiming of crystal glasses grow faint. What remains is silence, the slow, steady breath of a city at rest. And here, in the present, you may also rest. Unlike those who crowded into damp rooms or who fretted over the stench of the river, you are safe, warm, and comfortable. You do not need to fetch water from a pump or wait in line for bread. The struggles of the past can remain there, far away, softened by time. They have become stories now, gentle echoes to lull your thoughts into stillness. So, allow yourself to let go of the weight of history. Allow the candlelight of memory to flicker and dim. The streets of Victorian London grow quiet. The river smooths beneath the moon, and the city closes its eyes. You, too, may close yours. Let the rhythm of your breath replace the rhythm of their days. Let sleep come softly, like the hush of fog settling over the Thames. Good night.